It was the night of February 7, 2018, in the quiet, suburban city of Richardson, Texas. The sky was clear, and a calm winter stillness hung over the Breckenridge Point apartments, where hundreds of families had already settled in for the evening. But inside one apartment unit, a chain of violent events was already unfolding. Events that would forever change the lives of everyone who crossed its threshold that night. Just after 7 p.m., residents began hearing shouting echoing through the walls of one of the buildings. It wasn't the usual noise of neighbors arguing or music playing too loud. This was something darker, frantic, intense, and escalating by the second. Concerned neighbors dialed 911, reporting what they believed to be a domestic disturbance. For the officers on duty that night, this seemed like a standard call. But behind the closed door of apartment 1215, the situation had already turned deadly. Inside, 26-year-old Brandon McCall had shot and killed his close friend and roommate Renee Gomez. Investigators later determined that some form of heated argument had erupted between the two men. What exactly triggered it remains unclear, but what is certain is that McCall retrieved a rifle, an AR-15, and fired multiple rounds at Gomez inside the living room. Gomez, who had shared this home with McCall, had no warning and no chance to defend himself. His lifeless body lay on the floor as McCall began preparing for what would come next. Minutes later, Richardson police officers arrived at the scene. Among them was Officer David Sherrard, a respected 13-year veteran of the department. Known for his dedication to the force and his role as a loving husband and father of two young daughters, Sherrard had answered hundreds of calls just like this one. As he and his fellow officers approached the door, they had no reason to believe that a gunman was lying in wait on the other side. Sherrard was rushed to Medical City Plano, where doctors and fellow officers held on to hope. But despite every effort, the wound was fatal. That night, Officer David Sherrard was pronounced dead, becoming the first Richardson police officer ever killed in the line of duty. His death sent shockwaves through the department, the city, and law enforcement agencies across Texas. Finally, after hours of negotiations and tactical maneuvers, officers moved in. McCall was ultimately taken into custody alive in the early morning hours of February 8, 2018. He was handcuffed and led away from the same apartment where two lives had been lost. One of them his own friend, the other a decorated officer who had come to help. By late 2017 and early 2018, McCall's personal life had become increasingly unstable. He was living with his close friend Renee Gomez, who, according to court records and witness testimony, tried to support him but often found himself dealing with McCall's unpredictable temper. Their relationship, once friendly and easygoing, had become strained. Friends described frequent arguments between the two, sometimes over small things, other times fueled by McCall's drug use or paranoid episodes. A timeline pieced together through court testimony reveals a clear escalation. Emotional instability and paranoia deepened in the weeks before the tragedy. Tensions with Gomez became more frequent and heated. Access to a firearm gave McCall the means to act on his impulses. And as his mental state deteriorated, the fuse leading to February 7th was getting shorter by the day. Understanding this context doesn't excuse what he did. But it does shed light on the troubling progression of his behavior. A progression that, if recognized earlier, might have offered opportunities for intervention before tragedy struck. This, they argued, was not a split-second panic or a misunderstanding. It was calculated, lethal, and deliberate. The state emphasized that Officer Sherrard had no chance to react, no time to defend himself, and that McCall had shown a complete disregard for human life. Key witness testimonies gripped the courtroom. Fellow officers recounted the terrifying moments of the breach, the flash of muzzle fire, the chaos, the desperate fight to save Sherrard. Neighbors testified to the sounds of gunfire and the overwhelming police presence that night. Medical personnel detailed the severity of Sherrard's injuries, describing how even with immediate care, the wound was unsurvivable. When closing arguments came, prosecutors urged the jury to deliver justice, not just for David Sherrard but for his wife, his two daughters, his fellow officers, and a community left shattered. The defense pleaded for mercy, asking jurors to consider McCall's mental state and the possibility of redemption through life imprisonment. Outside the courthouse, community members and officers stood together, some holding candles, others quietly reflecting. The trial had reopened wounds, but it had also brought a sense of closure to many. The man who ambushed and killed Officer Sherrard would face the full weight of the justice system. In the months following Brandon McCall's death sentence, the courtroom lights dimmed, the news coverage slowed, and the public attention shifted elsewhere. But for the legal system, for McCall's defense team, and for the families left in the wake of this tragedy, the story was far from over. McCall's attorneys quickly began preparing their appeals, launching a new legal battle that would stretch on for years. They argued that McCall's trial counsel had been ineffective, claiming that key evidence about his mental health history and personal background had not been adequately presented during the sentencing phase. According to his defense, jurors did not hear the full picture of McCall's psychological struggles. Evidence, they said, that could have swayed them toward a sentence of life without parole instead of death. They also raised questions about whether McCall had been competent to stand trial, pointing to signs of severe emotional instability leading up to the shooting. His attorneys argued that his behavior that night was not the act of a calculated killer, but of a mentally fractured young man spiraling into chaos. However, the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals, the state's highest criminal court, reviewed these arguments and found them insufficient. In a detailed ruling, the judges upheld both McCall's conviction and his death sentence. They concluded that the evidence clearly showed deliberate actions. McCall armed himself, positioned himself near the door and opened fire on uniformed officers without provocation. The claims of ineffective counsel, they ruled, did not meet the legal threshold for overturning the sentence. Beyond the courtroom, McCall's case reignited a familiar and often divisive conversation in Texas and across the country. The death penalty has long stood at the intersection of justice and morality. For some, McCall's sentence represented a clear and just response to the cold-blooded killing of a police officer, a necessary measure to protect those who risk their lives daily. For others, it raised questions about mental illness, culpability, and whether execution truly serves as justice or simply closes the door on deeper societal issues. Legal experts weighed in, analyzing whether the defense had done enough, and whether Texas's death penalty statutes fairly consider mental health as a mitigating factor. Journalists revisited the story, highlighting the pain carried by both families: the Sherrards, who lost a beloved husband and father, and McCall's, who grappled with the reality of his actions and the looming execution of their son. Even within law enforcement circles, the case sparked reflection on the dangers officers face with each call they respond to, how what seems routine can turn deadly in seconds. Officer David Sherrard had walked through countless doors during his 13 years of service. On that February night, he walked through one that would end his life. The appeals continue, but for the families involved, the questions linger. Can legal challenges ever undo what happened that night? Can mental illness explain, though not excuse, the choices McCall made? And what does justice truly look like in a case like this? Retribution, rehabilitation, or something in between? Today, Daniel McCall sits on Texas death row inside the Allan B. Polunsky Unit, a maximum security prison located in Livingston, Texas. It's here, behind concrete walls, steel doors, and layers of razor wire, that Texas houses some of its most notorious inmates. McCall spends 23 hours a day in solitary confinement, confined to a small cell with little more than a bunk, a sink, and his thoughts. Human contact is minimal. Movement is tightly controlled. Meals are slid through a slot in the door. From this isolated existence, he awaits the slow, methodical march of the appeals process, a process that could take years before the state sets an execution date. Meanwhile, outside those walls, the legacy of Officer David Sherrard lives on. His name is etched into memorials, honored by fellow officers, and remembered by a community that still feels the shock of that February night. His wife and daughters continue their lives with courage and grace, supported by law enforcement families across Texas who refuse to let his sacrifice be forgotten. The story of Brandon McCall isn't just about a single night of violence. It's about the fragile line between chaos and order, the devastating impact of split-second decisions, and the enduring questions of justice, accountability, and redemption. It's a story that forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about mental health, about the dangers faced by first responders, and about the consequences of actions that can never be undone. As McCall remains behind bars in Livingston, and Officer Sherrard's family continues to heal, the wheels of justice keep turning, slowly, relentlessly, and often without easy answers. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe, hit the notification bell, and share this episode with someone who follows true crime stories. Your support helps us continue to bring you powerful, real-life narratives that dig deep, not just into the crimes themselves but into the human stories behind them. And remember, every case has layers and every headline has a heartbeat behind it.